Today's seminar is on 10 common landscape mistakes and most importantly, how to avoid them. We're more of an optimist company rather than a pessimist, so the format of this presentation you'll see is more or less the solutions. I'll touch on the minor mistake, but we'll talk about solution and possible considerations instead. The biggest thing with landscaping, whether it be design, whether it be installation, master gardening, a lot of you folks probably have experience with that, would be focusing or lack of focusing on the big picture. Too commonly, we get into that trend where we start planting a new specimen, maybe a new garden, maybe we're working with a contractor, and we chunk off a certain project. Well, 2 years down the road, we never really had a plan for the grand scheme, the big picture, and we discover ourselves having to redo what we just did 2 years ago, or splitting plants, or not understanding the horticultural elements and different sizes and maturities. Focusing on the big picture is very important, and when you don't do that, it can really set you back. A prime example is, in our end, more of the landscape design build realm. When we create a design or a plan, or when we meet with folks that would like a design or a plan put together, and they just want to focus on one phase, and even if the other phases may be considered for future down the road, 5, 10, 15 years, it's still good to consider where that plan is going to go to, the big picture. It allows you to efficiently manage your budgets. It also allows you to efficiently manage your planting schemes, your projects, your aspects. So again, we're not doing things twice. So big mistake, not focusing on the big picture. The best idea is to focus on the big picture. Start with your wish list, your plans, your likes, your dislikes, whether it's you designing or working with a professional design firm. Have, most importantly, your dislikes, because a good quality firm should be able to read in between the lines, understand the horticultural elements, and again, focus on the big picture. What is that plan going to look like in 5, 10, 15, maybe 20 years? That's a big trend. Topography. Too often, I don't know, maybe I'll just get a show of hands, where we've created a project, a garden bed, a landscape bed, maybe a patio, a walkway, a driveway, and all of a sudden we realize there's a water issue, maybe after we finished it, or we had something professionally installed. Has it ever come up where all of a sudden water becomes a problem? It's flowing back towards the house, we find a low spot. I see a couple nods, some hands in the back. It's okay, don't be shy. We're in here to learn, right? That's the whole point. We've all made mistakes, and certainly we've made our own mistakes too and have learned from them. But topography and grading, especially along the foundation, really needs to be considered. Beyond any functional or pretty picture, the grading and the topography is so important. Navigation, where is that water going to flow after we construct a certain phase or a certain project? Perhaps even with plantings. Am I planting the specimen too close or too far away from the house where water's not going to be able to have its proper swale or pitch to get away from the home foundation? And I keep referencing the home foundation, and that's important because though this is the green industry and we focus on plantings and landscape beds and quality landscape design, ultimately landscaping is a complementary aspect of the home. We spend a lot more of an investment, in most cases, on the home rather than the landscape. If we create a hindrance or a water issue where damming occurs, frost issues may happen, that's a big problem, and that can really cause financial stress and some other burdens down the road. Stormwater management, another key topic. Whether it's coming off of the roof or coming off from your neighbor up the hill that you guys are always cordial with, but by God, his water always comes down on my property. We have to be prepared for that. Creating swale lines. Considering the big picture, but also considering the topography. Where is that water going to flow? And also for folks that live along shoreline, and we see it right now on Lake Monona, ice damming is a big problem. It can cause major structural issues, and that also coincides with topography. Where is that ice going to go? Where is the water going to flow? Do we have proper pitch away from the home? And quite frankly, in our designs, we really try to shoot for a minimum of a 2% pitch on any hard surface, whether it be a patio, a walkway, driveway. But also for the plant beds, we look for more of like a 3 to 5% pitch coming off of the foundation. Your home should be on the pedestal and should have grade away, okay? Sometimes homes aren't at the highest point. Sometimes we have to create false foundation walls to make sure that the drip line coming off the roof can still direct water and surface and subsurface waters away from the house. So definitely topography is a major consideration in terms of water. Just some examples of topography and retention there. As you can see it towards the front, the retaining along the house foundation, the picture to your left on the main screen, that is a handicap accessible ramp right here in Madison. But at the same time, we needed to create frost protection in order to create that ramp from the driveway up to the house. And also, of course, redirect water. There are drainage, subsurface and behind the wall drainage considerations. There's a little black square box, if you will, on the picture to the left, and that allows basically the water, hydraulic pressure from behind the wall to weep out. Again, subsurface and surface topography and drainage is very important. Biggest mistake, I think, as far as aesthetically or connecting the whole picture is really not focusing on how does your inside flow with the outside. What are the connecting aesthetic features as far as ornamental design? You know, does the outside landscape, does it connect with how the interior views are? You know, the picture window. A lot of folks spend their time maybe behind that the kitchen sink, you know, doing dishes or preparing a meal. It'd still be nice to have that view towards the outside. And is that view to the outside, you know, pleasing? Does it match with the rest of the home? And the solution to that is connecting the interiors and the exterior. Easier said than done, but a good thing to take from this part, number 3, I would say essentially if you're hiring a professional design firm or looking to have a plan drawn up either by yourself, you're sketching notes, you're putting together that plan, make sure yourself or that professional individual comes inside the house. Very important, very important. And for multiple purposes, not just the feel or the certain design style that it connects with the outside, but also, you know, you want to make sure that that landscape from the inside looking out is enjoyed as many parts of the seasons and as many times of the day as possible. You know, last thing that you want is to have a beautiful landscape done, maybe some professional low voltage lighting put in. But that bay window, you're sitting by your fireplace inside, and just like what I'm experiencing right now, there's a light bomb, you know, just hitting me in the face, and oh, I really wish I would have considered that. You know, connecting the inside and outside is very important. Is your home more of an open grand scheme, you know, more open views, or is it more, you know, of a historic, let's say like a Victorian style home? I do think it's important that you should be able to match those qualities inside and out, and quite frankly, it's capturing the views and using the material selection is very important. Considering those is a good thing. Some good examples. As you see the picture on the left here that you're viewing, that's a Lake Wisconsin home property. We've decided to go with a natural irregular flagstone patio, and the veneer or the facade on that beautiful home is that same exact material. It's a Lannon buff and a Lannon gray thin veneer stone. On the inside of that house, which of course we're not showing, which is unfortunate, but the fireplace has all of that same Lannon irregular stone all the way up the fireplace, the large wood structures, even the dark soldier course on this patio. You know, they have all that dark crown molding in the house, and it connects that whole space inside and out. And quite frankly, I think it's very pleasing, but it's functional too. You know, you're not all of a sudden going to go from a Rembrandt room to a Picasso room, and that's appropriate in some art studios. But we want to keep that Rembrandt or that Norman Rockwell approach consistent, or that Picasso approach consistent. It just adds value to the home, and quite frankly, it really, you know, extends the feel. To the right, that's the picture of Wollersheim Distillery. The project there, again, the exterior of the stone walls is the same exact material as the retaining walls that were designed. Very wonderful example. On the interior of that wonderful project up there, again, it has some of that stone feel, the natural mixed with the Kentucky feel. Those lines need to mimic each other, and I think that's very important. And again, it draws the whole experience, both commercially and residentially. Focal point. You know, this can be interpreted in many different ways. Focal point, and in my opinion, a good example of what is not a good focal point is when you drive past a home, curb appeal, say you're driving at 15, 25 miles an hour in town, and you can't find the front door. That may seem really simple, or like, what's the importance of that? And that's a philosophy of design, a very ornamental aspect, but you should be guided either on the property or away from the property with curb appeal, bringing you to the front entrance, the warm welcome, okay? And sometimes that's accomplished through architecture. Sometimes that's accomplished through the landscaping, and sometimes it's corrected by the landscaping, or can be. Not to disrespect any of those quality builders out there, but in the design, finding that focal point, guiding somebody to the main characteristics of the home, or specifically the front door, is very important. You almost want your vision to be tunneled or funneled to that focal point. And that can be for the front yard. A good example in the backyard. Say you have a wonderful westerly view. A great view of a conservatory, something in the backyard, maybe a tree that even if it's a cottonwood and it drops all those limbs, but man, it sure is beautiful because it's 130 feet tall. We want to try to drive those views from the inside out and also from the outside in. Finding that focal point allows, as we say, allow the eye to rest. It's not so busy where you're confused with what you need to be looking at. And also, focal point can be stemmed off of softening architectural lines as well. And that's a whole other topic, but essentially, if we have a lot of hard, tall, upright lines, a lot of the big, beautiful homes of today, big, gable roofs, a lot of architectural squareness, a lot of neat things going on, but we want to soften and bring some focal point to the corners. We want to bring those lines down, soften it with different plant specimen selection. Perhaps with even a different type of stone, offering contrasting mulch and stones within the same landscape bed to bring your eye to that one particular spot that you really want the focus to be on. So focal point, lack thereof, is an issue with design. This is a pretty strong example in the picture to the right. That's definitely like a monoculture design, but it is drawing you to that main window. I mean, it's hard not to stare right where you need to go, guide you right down the path. And that can be incorporated, again, with some height variations of plant specimens, also softening with maybe some low-growing or curb appeal, curb-type specimens as well. Again, another example. Now, these are also cleverly taken with the camera to really guide that focal point. But picture on the right, more of a hardscape-dominated project. But even the pergola, not just planting, but that pergola offers a focal point to, quite frankly, their feature, which is their exterior fireplace. The walkway also guides towards that, and having the backdrop of the existing vegetation and tree line really helps draw that eye to rest, bring you right to that fireplace, which is, quite frankly, what those homeowners really want people to be proud of and see, and they're quite frankly proud to show it off. And the picture to the left there with the bubbling vase, the way the architecture is drawn with the patio and the softening of the specimens around the edge, of course, it's circular. It brings everyone right to that middle. That is the focal point. Some pretty, I would say, normal examples that we would see here in our area. Variety. Well, that's an interesting picture right there. There's not a whole lot going on. This is also more of a theory, but mass plantings, especially in the residential landscape, really don't invite for a warm, cozy feeling. It's also you get that monoculture that it's too much of one thing, and I'm trying to say this in the most realistic terms as possible. But we do want a good variety. And a mistake that people make is, well, quite frankly, you've probably seen it. Development from the 60s or 70s, maybe it still has that existing landscaping and the mass of dense hues. The evergreen yews or the big green, I see some, the big green junipers all along the front. That's a monoculture type landscape planting. There's no variety there. And it's not that that's just a trend, but think about it. There's no changes throughout the season. Where's the spring flower? Where's the fragrance in July? What about fall foliage? Not that sea green junipers or even dense yews don't have a place in the current landscaping, but they should be balanced with a good mix of evergreen, a good mix of flowering ornamental. Get a good strong spring flower. Maybe a forsythia in spring, a great first splash, a hint of spring. And then I don't know if any folks are from Stoughton, but get that PJM rhododendron, that nice lavender flower right around Sitnamai. And then after that's done, the weigelas kick in. Okay, maybe the 9-barks start to flower late summer. You have purple foliage, you have green foliage, you have pink flower, white flower. A good example, Autumn Brilliant Serviceberry offers multi-seasonal interest. Beautiful white spring flower. In the summer, nice green, rich foliage, but in the fall, beautiful burnt red foliage, almost like a burning bush red. And, picking that variety and having that within the landscaping, incorporating some evergreens, so when we have Snowmageddon again, it actually looks like there's something out there, not just a bunch of twigs, is very important. That doesn't just coincide with planting. That can also be a variety of hardscaping materials, having accent lines, inlays, different colors and textures to create different room space. I mean, just like in a home, if you walked into a house and it was all white wall, all the same flooring, the same window coverings, it would kind of feel like you're walking into a clinic. And I mean that respectfully, but very clean, very sanitary. If you also look at the landscaping outside of clinics, more commercialized, mass clusters of plantings, 150 Carl Forster grasses all in a row, 300 spirea along the foundation. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's a place for that, and it's more of the commercial setting. The residential home, you need some variety. Quite frankly, in Wisconsin, we need to mix it up a little bit ourselves too, so we have some interest throughout the years and throughout different seasons. Brings me back to that first example. This picture was taken in August during a drought of 2012 or 13. Massive sea green junipers up in front. Now the grass is unfortunately deader than a doornail too. But just to offer, these folks wanted a simplistic but an aesthetically pleasing design. And this is the picture of the immature design right after it was installed. We do have a good mix of evergreen. We do have, a good mix of upright on a standard with some beautiful burgundy foliage, foundation. But they'll get changes throughout the season. And quite frankly, it almost makes that house come right back to life. And that's a very simplistic and do-it-yourself approach. But again, it accomplishes so much compared to what those junipers were doing for that foundation before. Planting for all the seasons, kind of a stem off of my previous topic. We want seasonal interest in our landscapes, commercially, residentially, and not to sound too vague or too broad, but we do want good wintergreen mix within our landscapings. We don't want all deciduous or all perennial, all herbaceous. To have the combination and a proper ornamental design is very important. Again, it keeps our interest activated, keeps our senses alive, fragrances stimulated, if you will, and that's very important. To have that spring flower, the beautiful red bud, not the dead buds, but the eastern red buds. I see some smiles. Yeah, everyone knows what we're talking about there. But to have that beautiful pink flower, again, maybe the white spring flower off of a flowering ornamental crabapple, getting the forsythia and that first hint of spring, it's important, especially in our climate. Everyone's at the Garden Expo because we're anticipating spring. We have this good vibe of spring's coming and we're going to force the issue even if it's -5 outside. But that's something to look forward to, to have that spring flower. With an evergreen massing or even with just a deciduous massing, you may get that flower, but then maybe after that first 2 weeks it's gone and then nothing else throughout the season. To have the summer with perennial flower during the hotter times of the year when maybe the flowering ornamentals are done, they're into full leaf. That's where a great opportunity for the different daylily varieties to take off. Maybe the blanket flower. Different approaches to have some spring and summer continuation, even into fall. Some of our hydrangea specimens in the late fall have a beautiful blossom, even as they start to brown, can be used for a dry cutting. Getting those seasons, that seasonal change is very important. And quite frankly, my favorite time of the year for multiple purposes, not just because of Green Bay and Wisconsin Badger football, but Wisconsin fall foliage is very important. And you can accomplish that with more than just trees. Little Henry Sweetspire, wonderful opportunity to get some of that red foliage, that burnt foliage. The burning bush, everyone's familiar with that fiery bright red in the fall. And even some of the yellows, you get that with the birch and other different varieties. But try to have it so we're having seasonal interest. The evergreen is the foundation of color throughout the year, and the evergreens aren't just green. We can get beautiful blues, yellow tones, rich greens, light greens. But to have the color and the foliage interest is very important. And so many times, we forget that when we go to the local garden center and we want to try to plant up the foundation. Oh, I love that shrub. That's beautiful. I'm going to buy 6 of them, plant them along my foundation. Well, then a week later, it loses its seasonal interest. And not a bad shrub, but it's kind of boring now. We want to mix. We want to mix it up a little bit. So planting for all seasons is the solution to just considering one hot item during a particular part of the year. Scale and proportion. Yep, we're looking right at it and we're laughing and we're smiling, and quite frankly, I love the cacti picture on the right. I think it's great. A little different concept than what we experience up here. But what I'm getting at with scale and proportion, guys, is quite frankly, knowing what the maturity sizes of plants are. We don't expect everyone to be a horticulturalist or an arborist. We don't expect everyone to have gone to school for 5 to 6 years or more to learn these plant specimens. But it's okay to ask and be familiar with how large, wide, and height are some of these plants going to be. It's common to hear a professional designer that's been experienced and has a good horticultural knowledge to say that they're designing to maturity. Very important, and that's not just for the woodies and for the large-scale evergreens, but that's also for the perennial too. Not necessarily in size, but how much will this perennial spread? Will it take over my whole front yard? Understanding the scale and proportion is very important. So you're investing, and not just now, but you're investing in 5, 10, 15 years, which you'll commonly hear me say throughout this presentation. Making sure that you don't plant an American arborvitae 2 feet off the house right by the front door, and then all of a sudden, 7 years later, you know what, we haven't used that front door in a long time. I don't even know where it is anymore. So, understanding that is very, very important. And quite frankly, we don't expect you to be experts. A good horticulturalist, a good designer, landscape architect should understand some of those growth habits and place it accordingly. I don't know what it was, but there was a trend, I would say, in the late 90s, maybe even early 90s for that matter, where everyone was planting, heritage river birch like 3 feet off the corner of their house. And again, I saw a couple eyes roll over there and some smiles. I don't know if we all realize that tree is going to get over 25 feet tall, and the multiple stems are going to be, blowing off your eaves in a few years. Another really common one is the Techni arborvitae, right next to the corner of the house, or to soften that architectural line. Guess what, folks? Those get pretty big too. And I don't know if we just didn't know that, but then there's also that example of the Mugo pine. Mugo pines, beautiful little shrub, supposed to get about 3 to 5 feet, I believe they originally called for. Who planted a Mugo pine and had it reach over 15? We've been there. Yeah, I've seen hands, right? Now, that's not your fault, or probably not even the designer's fault. Let's blame Bailey's or something for that on that one, or the cultivars that came out. Joking aside, but sometimes plants do grow just like human beings. The average height for a human being, I believe, is 5'10" in today's age. I mean, we have the Shaquille O'Neals out there, and we also have the gymnasts too. And sometimes we need to be prepared for that. So giving yourself enough cushion for that scale or that proportion, that maturity size, is very important. And again, too big can be overwhelming. Too small, you can go the contrast on that and be too far spaced out, and then it just feels kind of naked, to be honest with you. Pretty staunch differences there from the left and right picture on your screen, but needless to say, still very important to have consideration. And I just a show of hands, just for fun, how many people have way overplanted a design and regretted it like 5 to 6 years later? Okay, so about a third of the room. How many folks have had, okay, a little bit more growing, we're getting some confidence back there. What about underplanting, where it's gotten to the point where you're like, okay, I need to do something here. Okay, so about a quarter. And the rest, everyone's landscapes were just perfect, I'm assuming, right? So, and that's okay too. Good for you guys. You figured it out right away. It's taken us about 30 years of business to really figure out the exact mix, and we all have our own philosophies, but it is trial and error. And horticulturally, they are live specimens. There's no glass ceiling to how big they may get. And even if Michael Durr wrote a wonderful book on it, and he's very well known, if anyone has ever heard of Michael Durr, even he's been surprised sometimes too. So. Moving on here. Scale and proportion. This can be not just in the horticultural realm. This can also be in the hard surface or the hardscaping realm too. This is an example of actually a unique scenario. It's a front door, okay? Most of the time we don't have living spaces by the front door. This is a double French door for an entrance of a home, okay? And the walkway initially that was there, the existing concrete structure, was far too small. Quite frankly, no more than one person could stand on that front stoop and feel comfortable. It also wasn't very inviting. Yeah, it directs you right to the door, but there's a lot of hard lines there. And what the homeowners really wanted with this was Well, first of all, they said, we don't know what we want per se, but we want a more inviting surface, and we want kids when they come up for trick-or-treating to not feel like, they're going to fall off of a stoop, or they have to, be in single file lines to come into the house. So creating that scale and proportion, that warmness, which fits with that particular home, is also important in the hardscape design, whether it be concrete, pavers, flagstone. You don't want to throw a 600 square foot living space in someone's front yard by any means, but if there's no backyard and the front yard is the only opportunity for it, maybe that's appropriate. Again, consulting with your designer, if you're working with a design firm, is very important. And again, guiding them so they're facing the front door, not just at an angle, which is what was there from existing. Moving on here. Scale and proportion. Okay, backyard setting. I chuckle at this. In today's day and age, horticulturally, I would say in the past, commonly landscapes were dominated by the horticultural or the softscape approach, and then complemented with a hardscape feature, whether it be a deck or a patio slab. Today, as you folks know, you've seen those trends change. A lot of folks are creating outdoor living spaces, is what it's being called, outdoor living experiences, where it's a ability to be outside, but at the same time be softened by a wonderful plantscaping. Now, in this case, we don't see the plantscaping in the before and after pictures, but regarding scale and proportion, that backsliding door, that house was really poured with a 6-foot slab off the backsliding door originally, and quite frankly, the use of that is near zero. By the time you step out and maybe have a grill, well, we all know, and I'm sure we've experienced this too, that grill is going to have to be in the grass always. We're melting siding pretty quick. And the homeowners of this property were great. They were like, yeah, well, when this house was purchased, we were told it has a patio slab on the back, great for entertaining. And right. And of course, and they moved into the community and they walked back there and they said, well, I'm not sure who we're entertaining, maybe, but it just wasn't proportional for what the space should be. It's a sliding basement access outside. They needed to have more space there. They needed to have it functional space for cooking and also for fire pit. So scale and proportion is not just with plants. It's also with hardscaping too. And all too often we see this a lot with new build, with spec home building, respectfully, that the patio slab or the backyard patio is far too small. And not to get too in depth on this, but one of the best ways to determine how big your patio space needs to be is a lot of folks have some furniture. They maybe have a grill already. Lay that space out, even if it's in the yard. Take a garden hose. This is a do-it-yourself experience right here. Take a garden hose and wrap it around the space, and then have a couple of your family members walk around that space to make sure you're giving yourself enough adequate patio space so you're not having to step onto the grass to use your patio. And so again, scale and proportion is very important, and that coincides with the hardscape outdoor living experience as well. Lighting. One of the biggest mistakes is lack of lighting. Lighting offers a security function. It does help highlight your home. It's a lot easier to say, we live at 1805 Johnson Street, the house that's lit up, and people can find your residence. Security is a big one. Secondly, it also, we have a short enough season as it is. Whether you're a horticultural plant, enthusiast, or you're an outdoor living experience enthusiast, wouldn't it be great to be able to enjoy that investment, both planting and hard surface, not just year-round, but maybe for a few extended hours, especially when it's still 55, 60 degrees, but the sun's setting at 5:30. It would be great to have a little bit of that ambience and that ability to illuminate that space, or that specialty plant, or that specimen, or that water feature, and extend that usability into the evening hours. Lighting itself, I would say the wrong is not doing lighting of some sort. Houses today, they always have lights by the garage for particular reasons, for safety, for security. Usually there's a front door light. Now you're seeing can lights in the soffit, and eaves, very important. But far too often, lighting, landscape lighting specifically, is underestimated as far as what it can add to the value of your home. being able to highlight that wonderful and very expensive brick or stone veneer that you paid extra for when you designed that house, and all of a sudden now it's washed out for the other half of the day. The other thing is quite frankly, lighting today has come a long way with LED lighting. There's zoning and dimmable capabilities now, programming and themes, where it's not all or nothing. It's not 100% stage light or zero. You can have different dimming capabilities to where it offers some ambience, a little bit more of a warm feeling to it. And for safety reasons, folks live on a lake property and they have a path down to the river, down to the water. It'd be great to have that lit so people aren't tripping and falling. The other thing too is that the nightlife, create your nightlife, and improves your entertainment. It really does. I mean, quite frankly, I don't know if anyone's experienced Oberg Gardens in the evening. If maybe a show of hands, if anyone's actually seen their lighting, a few. Stunning, right? And that was actually, I can't take credit for this, but Jan Moyer, no relation, believe it or not, was one of the main designers on that. Fantastic job. And obviously they've teamed up with a lot of other folks too. But Oberg Garden is gorgeous during the day. Oberg Garden at night is gorgeous times two, in my opinion. And I'm not a lighting fanatic, but it really does take on a whole other life form. Shadow casting, different shades, different colors, even different lens colors. So very important. And how many folks here already have landscape lighting or have dabbled with it? Just curious. Okay. Of those, LED lighting, show of hands, or traditional halogen? Okay, so most folks are getting back into the LED, and again, power consumption, eaves, it really is fantastic. Good example of a good and honestly an overlit home. The bottom left is an overlit bad example. So people not doing lighting, number one, is I would say try lighting, but then you can go the far ends of it on either end perspective. The bottom left-hand corner, quite frankly, is a house that has an extreme light bomb right in the middle. I mean, it does have balance, and there's some goods there, but it's almost overlit. It's overwhelming, and we don't want it to feel like we're pulling up into a KISS concert, at Alpine Valley or something. It wants to be warm, inviting, subtle, simple elegance, even in the evening hours. The house on the right, quite frankly, is a softened architectural lighting. It highlights the house. It draws your interest. Now, the light right over the front door is shut off, which it should be on for this picture. But the exterior, the home is highlighted. The board and batten exterior, the planting, the driveway. It's just a nice, soft, subtle glow, and almost to the point where you would think, oh, well, actually, the house isn't lit. The sun must be setting. Well, believe it or not, I believe that picture was taken at about 9:30 at night, and now it wasn't a super dark evening, but again, it does help soften that space. And quite frankly, there is a wow factor. Rural or in town, lighting does play a big role. Quite frankly, even in the rural settings, I mean, we live out way off the road, very quiet setting. But to have a little bit of lighting up towards the front, it makes it not so spooky when guests pull down the long driveway, to be honest with you. So creates a welcoming space. Details, or the number 9 mistake, lack thereof. And vaguely, we all know attention is, to the details is the important part. Having the small things are what matters the most, and I can't stress that enough. Planting, paving, and with planting, having the right pop of the yellow flower at the perfect time of year, that's the detail. Right along the walkway. Hopefully we don't have anyone allergic, but maybe that bay window with a dwarf Korean lilac with nice fragrant flowers coming into the window at the right time. That's the attention to the details. Thinking of the small things, very important. But paving and even wood structures plays a big part of that. Attention to detail is everything. You walk into a house with some crown molding and maybe some wainscoting, and that's great. But then you walk in and you see a house that on the interior that maybe has that custom-made rail, that custom-made crown molding, and the difference that makes and the attention to the detail is fascinating. That can be carried over into the landscaping, and of course, details generally do come with a cost too, whether it's your own time, your own patience, your own trips back and forth through the garden center, but also if it's hiring professionally done. But it does make all the difference. And more of a purchasing or a life example, don't settle on the details. If a detail is important to you, find a way to make it happen. If that means holding off on the backyard phase for now, do so. because the attention to detail is everything, especially with the front and the exterior. The outdoor living space is very important. And I could get a topic on details for 3 days if we wanted to, but I think we're limited with time today. But it definitely makes a big difference. Again, details, more of the hard version of this as an example. A big trend in the past was, besides that little 6 by 10 foot concrete slab, which lacked all detail that we saw on a previous slide, but then it was paving a 300 square foot area with the same Holland paver, the same color, maybe the same color soldier course. Well, it's nice and it's great, but people have discovered really with not necessarily any additional cost per se, just like in a home, we can have picture framing, we can have contrasting colors and textures, to provide that different room feel, that different space. Again, the attention to the details is very, very neat. And maybe trying a new mixed media. There's no right or wrong answer here. It's really up to you as far as the likes that you like to go with. Layering different plant material in your perennial garden to get that detail, that character is very, very important. The fireplace on the right-hand side. Honestly, 10, 12 years ago, who would have thought that you're using bricks and wall block to create something like that? Whoever came up with that idea, pat on their back, because that's really neat. We've seen the evolution of landscaping and planting come a long way. And again, it's the attention to the details. Even allowing the space for the decorative, the perennial pots or the annual pots on the side, that all plays a big part. And can't stress enough that there's really good, and then there's high detail, and that's really, really, really good. And it really makes for a good conversation starter, and quite honestly, something to be proud of. You've never heard someone said, well, yeah, I'm really proud of that. I slapped that together in 15 minutes. Doesn't look great. Or this took me 6 months. I went through 2 back adjustments, 2 cases of Advil, but now look at it. There's a lot more pride in that detail remark. That's for sure. This is a big one, and I'm going to stay on this one for a little bit. And this is a professional belief, I guess my personal belief as well. But the biggest mistake, and this is multifaceted, mind you, is that people setting themselves up for an overwhelming amount of unnecessary maintenance in the landscape world. That can be planting, that can be your grass, that could be your deck, that could be your patio, it could be your landscape lighting. And I saved this for last because it's all encompassing of all the previous slides that we just discussed about. Maintenance is a real consideration of time, of expense, and generally it's due to lack of proper planning up front. Seeing that big picture, understanding what is this going to take for me to keep this looking nice into the future. My personal pocketbook, number 1, my stress and frustration, number 2, how many glasses of wine am I going to need after the end of that weekend of pulling that many weeds, number 3, and that can go on and further. But also, proper planting, proper installation, very, very big as far as, reducing that need for unnecessary maintenance. Great example of that, and if you have all the time in the world, it's fantastic. But over planting annuals within your sustainable landscape, within your permanent landscaping, there's a time and place for annuals, decorative pots, maybe that functional garden space, maybe that pot right up by the front house or by the back door. But try not to overextend yourself with having to be married to that year-round. And I am not taking away anything from our wonderful garden centers out there that have beautiful annuals, because it's fun to do those things. But sometimes, guess what? Life happens, our health happens, and now we're stuck with a feature that needed to be planted of those annuals, and now there it sits naked. You don't want that to be the main focal point of your home. You can accomplish flower and texture and fragrance with uses of more hardy perennial, as well as woody ornamentals and even evergreen. And not that there's not a spot for annuals, but that's one of the biggest issues that we see. Oh, I love annuals. I love annuals. Well, then peel off a couple layers of the onion. Why do you like annuals so much? Oh, because there's yellows and blues and lavenders and pinks and whites. Oh, the flowers can go on and on. Okay, and what do you like about those colors? Well, it's great to have all those colors. What do you not like about that? Well, we've got a deadhead. Yeah, we have to replant them every year. And then you start finding out, well, maybe we can accomplish some of that in some good spaces, but perhaps we can also accomplish those same colors and fragrances with a specimen that maybe needs a couple wild hairs pruned from it from time to time, once a year, maybe once every other year. Oh, really? Those exist? Yeah, they do. And so considering, the mass annual clusters, and again, there's definitely a time and place for annuals, and quite frankly, this is the best show to be at for that, but try not to overwhelm yourself with it. The other thing is maintenance as far as weed barrier. Do I use it? Number one. Number two, what do we use for a weed barrier in our landscape beds, professionally or DIY? There are, you could probably start throwing things at each other with all the different opinions on this, but respectfully, weed barriers are important, and for the sense of it does protect you from having to be out in your landscape the entire year, pulling weeds. Personally, in our firm and some other firms, we do use a visqueen, a plastic more commonly than a fabric, okay? And I'll explain the benefits of both. And we also use fabric too on occasion, given a certain topography. But visqueen a weed barrier, quite frankly, it serves the purpose of moisture retention as well as the ability to keep weeds down and out. Best example of visqueen is, people say, well, no water can get to the plant. Well, around each plant, there should be the drip line cutaway of the visqueen. If you're following me, like on a shrub, if the shrub is 12 inches wide per se, that diameter of that circle cut around that plant should be approximately 12 to 15 inches. Now, people say, well, that's great, but when it rains, what happens then? Well, water, it does find the path of least resistance, and when it's a heavy moisture saturation day, water will hit that visqueen and disperse, and generally it would disperse towards where the opening is or back into the soil. Now, in reverse end, our soils breathe, our soils transpire, and visqueen does create almost its own greenhouse effect, if you will, in comparison to some permeable or breathable fabrics. Whereas as our soils are breathing or transpiring, the moisture is wicking its way to the top surface, it hits that visqueen, and then through adhesion and cohesion, it finds the path of least resistance. Opposite of rain, this time it's going up. It's pulling that moisture towards the concentrated area of where the roots are in the plants, which is where that gap is cut out in the plastic. Fabric, the reason why professionally we've steered away from that with most cases, just for reference, is that it is a wonderful harbor for roots, and roots of all kinds, turf, weeds, etc. And people say, well, we like fabric because it allows for permeation of moisture. And true, I would also challenge you to take some of your landscape fabric right out of the box or something that's been in for a few years and run a light garden hose on that. Maybe even use it like a coffee filter. How much is actually dripping through? You'll be surprised on how little actually drips through because of the different products and fabrics and materials that are made of these fibers. It actually wicks the moisture right off. So you don't get as much permeation as you'd like to see with fabric, but as fabric breaks down, it does silt in and essentially does become a solid barrier anyways. It does break down over time, and quite frankly, at that point, that's when the weeds can set in. So fabric is better than nothing, but there's a lot of beliefs and studies done at different universities, Cornell being one of them. I know UW did a good study on this a few years ago regarding visqueen and the negative or positive impacts on plantings. And quite frankly, the negatives haven't outweighed the positives as far as maintenance setting and some different horticultural health aspects. And that goes for watering and weeding. Fertilization. Some people say, I want that yard to look fantastic. I'm gonna blast it with nitrogen. I'm just gonna kick this thing up with some iron and really get going on it. Well, you also are setting yourself up for some possible frustration with too much growth and quite frankly, an inability for the roots to survive off of the macros and micros that are already in the soil. Mulching. Stone versus hardwood mulch. Both medias have their purpose. Both medias have their aesthetic and functional qualities. We wouldn't recommend that you put a mulch on like a 60-degree slope. For the maintenance sense of every time it rains, we get that wonderful July Wisconsin rain. It's down in the neighbor's driveway, and we're having to scoop it up on a Sunday morning. We don't want to do that. So again, maintenance essentially boils down to proper planning, looking ahead, forecasting ahead, understanding plant sizes, growth habits, knowing how certain plants are going to grow. Do they need constant pruning? Do they not? Proper pruning for that matter. I know we've all done it. I'm sure we've seen people have done it, taken that hedge clippers and top off the whole hedgerow, and then wonder why next year that hedge is 4 times thicker on the upper surface and it actually grew more than what we were hoping for. Again, improper pruning, stimulating that meristematic growth to where it just explodes. Learning some of these things and honestly taking a little effort to whether you're do it yourself or with a professional consult, the internet is a wonderful resource for these things too. And now we don't believe everything that the internet tells us, but it is nice to get some different pruning techniques and different landscape techniques for care and maintenance. Call for backup. Ask for help. Could be a neighbor, could be a horticulturalist, could be the urban forester in your local city or street department, could be your professional up the road. Those things are all key, and it's okay to rely on help from time to time. So, yeah, thank you.